When Brandon looked me in the eye at my 60th birthday dinner and said, "Here's a retirement clock, Thomas. Maybe it's time you stopped leeching off my mother and became obsolete like the rest of your boring accountant life." I felt something inside me snap like a pencil under pressure. I smiled calmly, thanked him for the gift, and excused myself to the bathroom where I immediately called my old colleague at the forensic accounting firm. By morning, I had already frozen our joint accounts and begun the audit that would destroy him. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The restaurant had been perfect that evening. Exactly the kind of place Margaret loved: soft lighting, jazz playing quietly in the background, white tablecloths that reminded her of our wedding 6 years ago. She'd chosen it specially for my birthday, and I could see the excitement in her eyes as she watched me open the small wrapped gifts she'd arranged on the table. Brandon and Leah had arrived fashionably late, as usual, but for once I didn't mind. They seemed genuinely happy to be there. "Thomas, you've been so good to us," Brandon had said earlier, raising his wine glass. "I mean it. Not every man would step up the way you have." He'd looked at Leah then, and she'd nodded approvingly. 6 years of college support, helping with my apartment, never once making me feel like I wasn't your real son. Margaret had reached over and squeezed my hand. "He means it, honey. You've been incredible." I'd felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. The same feeling I'd had when I first met Margaret at that community theater production. She'd been playing Lady Macbeth, and even though the theater was small and the costumes were obviously rented, she'd commanded the stage like she belonged there. When I'd approached her after the show, nervous and probably sweating through my shirt, she'd smiled and said yes to coffee. 6 months later, she'd introduced me to Brandon, this lanky 20-year-old who worked part-time at a computer store and dreamed of getting into Georgia Tech. "I have something for you too," I'd said that night, pulling out the envelope I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket. "It's not much, but I thought maybe you and Leah could use it for a nice vacation after graduation." Brandon had opened it slowly, and I'd watched his face light up when he saw the check. $2,000, money I'd saved by bringing lunch to work for 3 months instead of buying it. "Thomas, this is wow." He'd looked at Leah, then back at me. "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Your family." That's when Margaret had suggested we order dessert, and the waiter had brought out a small cake with candles. Everything had been perfect. Brandon had even helped me blow out the candles, laughing when I couldn't get the last one. But then came the gifts. Margaret had given me a beautiful leather briefcase to replace the worn one I'd been carrying for 15 years. "For all your important documents," she'd said, kissing my cheek. Leah had handed me a bottle of cologne, expensive stuff that I'd never buy for myself. And then Brandon had reached under his chair and pulled out a wrapped box. The atmosphere shifted so subtly that I almost missed it. Leah suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. Brandon's smile became tight around the edges. Margaret continued chatting about dessert, oblivious to the change. "This one's special," Brandon said, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. "I put a lot of thought into it." I unwrapped it carefully, the way I'd been taught as a child. Fold the paper. Don't tear it. Save it for next time. Inside was a wooden desk clock, the kind you might find at a gas station gift shop. Cheap wood grain. Digital display. Retirement printed across the top in gold letters that were already starting to peel. "Brandon, this is..." I started, but he cut me off. "Let me explain." He leaned back in his chair, and suddenly he looked different. Older. Harder. "See, Thomas, I've been thinking a lot lately about your situation. 60 years old, still working that same boring job, still living off my mother's generosity." His voice got louder, enough that people at nearby tables started glancing over. And I realized, maybe it's time you stopped leeching off her and became obsolete like the rest of your boring accountant life. Leah giggled. Actually giggled. "I mean, it's not like we ever visit because, honestly, your lives are just so mundane. All you do is talk about spreadsheets and watch old movies." The words hit me like cold water. I felt my hands go numb, holding that cheap clock, and everything around me seemed to slow down. The jazz music became distant. Margaret's face went white, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The candle flames on our table flickered, casting shadows that made Brandon's face look cruel. "Brandon," Margaret whispered, "what are you saying?" But he wasn't done. "I'm saying maybe it's time Thomas accepted reality. You're not my father. You're just some guy who married my mom and thinks that makes him important. This," he gestured at the restaurant, at the gifts, at me, "this is charity. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending to be grateful for it." I stood up slowly, placing the clock on the table with the same careful precision I used when balancing ledgers. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. I put on my coat, nodded to Margaret, and walked out of that restaurant without saying a single word. Behind me, I heard Margaret's voice rising, angry now, but I kept walking. I drove home in complete silence and sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at that clock. I'd met Brandon when he was 20, cocky, sure but bright, full of dreams about computer programming and making millions in tech. Margaret had been worried about the cost of Georgia Tech, $43,000 a year for out-of-state tuition, plus living expenses. I'd done the math in my head before she'd even finished explaining. My annual salary as a senior accountant was $78,000. After taxes, mortgage, and basic living expenses, I had maybe $18,000 left over each year. "We'll make it work," I told her that first night we talked about it. "He's a good kid. He deserves a chance." I'd liquidated my retirement account early, paid the penalties, and covered his first year in full. $51,000, tuition, books, apartment deposit, meal plan, everything. The next 3 years, I'd sold my father's tools, my mother's china, and the classic Mustang I'd been restoring in the garage. Brandon had graduated with a computer science degree and zero debt. While his friends were struggling with loan payments, Brandon had been free to take internships, to be picky about job offers, to move to a better apartment. I'd continued paying his rent for the first year after graduation, another $14,400, until he'd found his footing at a software company. But sitting there in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, holding that insulting clock, I remembered other things too. How he'd rolled his eyes when I tried to teach him to change oil in his car. How he'd never once asked about my work, despite the fact that my boring accounting skills had made his entire education possible. How he'd started bringing Leah around without ever introducing her properly, like I wasn't worth the courtesy. I remembered the Christmas when Margaret had gotten pneumonia, and I'd sat by her hospital bed for 3 days straight. Brandon had sent flowers and a card from Seattle, where he was too busy with a new project to visit. I'd held her hand through fever and chills, driven her to every doctor's appointment, and never once thought about what I was missing at work. I remembered my promotion dinner 2 years ago, the first time in my career I'd made it to senior partner. Margaret had planned a celebration at home, cooked my favorite meal, bought champagne. Brandon had canceled 30 minutes before, claiming a work emergency. Later, I'd seen his Instagram posts from that same night. He'd been at a concert with Leah. The numbers kept coming, precise and merciless. I kept meticulous records, of course. $28,372 in direct educational expenses. $14,400 in post-graduation rent. Another $6,000 in various emergencies, car repairs, medical bills, security deposits. Add in the gifts, the dinners, the holiday money, and I'd invested nearly $52,000 in Brandon's future. But it wasn't just the money. It was the time. The Saturdays I'd spent helping him move apartments. The evenings I'd sat through his girlfriend problems, giving advice he'd never take. The family gatherings where I'd played the proud stepfather while he made jokes about my receding hairline or my ancient music collection. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. Sitting there as the sun came up, I expected to feel rage, but instead I felt something much colder. Something that settled in my chest like ice water. I'd spent 37 years as an accountant, and I'd learned something important. Numbers don't lie. People do, but numbers tell the truth. I didn't cry. I calculated. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and on my way to the office. Margaret had called twice, but I'd let it go to voicemail. I had work to do. The first thing I did was pull every financial document I'd saved over the past 6 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, canceled checks, tax returns. I spread them across my dining room table and began building a timeline. Every payment, every gift, every expense, cataloged with dates and amounts. It took me until 3 in the morning, but when I was finished, I had a complete financial picture of my relationship with Brandon. Then I started digging deeper. Brandon had always been vague about his job, claiming it was too technical for me to understand. But I'd been doing forensic accounting for 15 years before moving to general practice, and I knew how to follow money trails. A few calls to colleagues, some careful research, and I discovered that Brandon worked for a small software company that contracted with local businesses. Nothing fancy, nothing revolutionary. His salary was probably around $60,000 a year, good money, but not the six-figure income he'd implied. More interesting was what I found when I looked into his finances. Credit card debt, a car loan on a BMW he couldn't afford, rent on a downtown apartment that cost more than my mortgage. Brandon wasn't the successful tech prodigy he'd pretended to be. He was barely scraping by, living beyond his means, and apparently resenting the man who'd made his lifestyle possible. But the real revelation came when I examined our joint family account. Margaret and I had opened it 2 years ago as a way to help with household expenses and occasional family emergencies. We each contributed $500 a month, and the account was supposed to be for things like home repairs, family vacations, and unexpected medical costs. The balance should have been around $12,000. Instead, it showed $7,300. I printed every transaction for the past 24 months and found a pattern that made my blood run cold. Brandon had been given access to the account for emergencies 6 months ago. Since then, he'd made 17 withdrawals totaling $4,700. Small amounts, usually $200 or $300 at a time, always with vague descriptions like family expense or household item. But I cross-referenced the dates with his social media posts. The $300 family expense on March 15th had coincided with pictures of an expensive dinner at a steakhouse. The $250 household item from April 3rd had been posted alongside photos of new designer clothes. The $400 withdrawal from June had happened the same weekend he and Leah had posted pictures from a beach resort. He'd been stealing from us. Not just taking advantage of my generosity, but actually stealing from a shared family fund. Money that Margaret had contributed, money we'd set aside for emergencies, money that was supposed to help all of us. I sat back in my chair and stared at the evidence spread across my table. This wasn't just ingratitude. This was theft. This was betrayal on a level that went beyond hurt feelings or family drama. I picked up my phone and called Robert Chen, my former partner at the forensic accounting firm. "Tommy, long time. What can I do for you?" "I need a favor, Robert. I need a complete financial workup on someone. Background check, credit report, employment verification, the works. Personal or professional?" I looked at the evidence in front of me. Both. The report arrived by email 3 days later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Brandon's BMW was 3 months behind on payments. His credit cards were maxed out. He'd been passed over for promotion twice at work, and according to Robert's contact at the software company, there were rumors about irregularities in his expense reports. But the most damning information came from public records. Brandon had filed a small claims action against a former roommate, claiming damages for unauthorized use of shared resources. He'd won the case and collected $800. The irony was staggering. He'd successfully sued someone for exactly what he'd been doing to us. I printed everything, organized it into folders, and made copies. Then I called my lawyer. "Edmund, it's Thomas Whitaker. I need to see you about a family matter." Edmund Ross had been handling legal work for Margaret and me for 3 years. A quiet man in his 70s who specialized in family law and estate planning. He listened without interruption as I laid out the evidence, occasionally making notes in his careful handwriting. "This is theft, Thomas. Clear cut. You could pursue criminal charges if you wanted to. I don't want him in jail, Edmund. I want justice. What does that look like to you?" I'd been thinking about that question for days. "I want him to understand consequences. I want him to experience what it feels like to lose something important. And I want to make sure he can never hurt Margaret or me again. Edmund nodded. I can work with that. Give me a week. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. First, I would immediately freeze all joint accounts and remove Brandon's access to any shared resources. Second, I would formally demand repayment of the stolen funds, with interest within 30 days. Third, if he refused or couldn't pay, I would file a civil suit for theft and fraud, with all evidence made public record. But the real masterstroke was Edmund's idea. Since Brandon had been claiming me as a dependent on his health insurance, a benefit I'd been paying for without realizing it, we would make sure his employer knew about his financial irregularities. Not to get him fired, but to ensure his next background check would raise questions. The final element was a family meeting. Margaret's sister hosted a reunion every summer at her lake house. The whole extended family would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone who'd watched Brandon grow up and succeed. It would be the perfect venue to present our findings and let the family decide for themselves who was telling the truth. I started with the bank accounts. On a Tuesday morning, I drove to our credit union and met with the manager. I had all the documentation ready, copies of the unauthorized withdrawals, evidence of Brandon's deception, and legal authority to protect our joint assets. I need to freeze these accounts immediately and remove all access except for my wife and myself, I said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. The manager, a woman named Patricia who'd handled our finances for years, read through everything carefully. Her expression grew more serious with each page. Mr. Whitaker, I'm so sorry this happened to you. We'll take care of this right away. Within an hour, Brandon's debit card was deactivated and his access was revoked. I kept Margaret's access intact. She'd contributed honestly to those accounts and deserved to maintain control over her own money. But I also set up alerts on my phone for any new activity. The first call came that afternoon. Thomas, what the hell did you do? My card isn't working. I'd been expecting this. Brandon's voice was tight with panic, the same tone he'd used in college when he'd overdrawn his checking account and needed emergency money. Brandon, how are you? Don't play games with me. I tried to buy lunch and my card was declined. The bank said the account is frozen. That's correct. What do you mean that's correct? You can't just freeze accounts that I have access to. I let the silence stretch. In my experience, angry people usually revealed more than they intended when they had to fill quiet spaces. I have access to those accounts, he continued. Mom said I could use them for emergencies. I'm aware of the arrangement. I'm also aware that you withdrew $4,700 over the past 6 months for personal expenses that had nothing to do with emergencies. Another silence, but this one felt different. Calculating instead of angry. I don't know what you're talking about. March 15th, $300, the same day you posted pictures from Bones Restaurant. April 3rd, $250, tagged with photos of Ralph Lauren shirts. June 18th, $400, coinciding with your weekend in Savannah with Leah. You're stalking my social media? I'm protecting assets that were being misused. The account was frozen to prevent further unauthorized access. Unauthorized? I'm family. That word hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. Family doesn't steal from each other, Brandon. I wasn't stealing. I was borrowing. Did you ask permission for these withdrawals? I didn't think I needed to ask. Did you have any intention of paying the money back? Silence. Did you inform your mother or me about any of these transactions? More silence. Brandon, when someone takes money that doesn't belong to them without permission and with no intention of returning it, that's called theft. The fact that we share DNA with your mother doesn't change the legal definition. You can't do this. His voice had changed again, whiny now like a child who'd been caught cheating at a board game. I'll tell Mom what you're doing. Please do. I plan to show her the evidence myself. He hung up. Margaret was waiting when I got home that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, still in her work clothes, and I could see from her expression that Brandon had already called. Thomas, we need to talk. I sat down across from her and pulled out the folders I'd prepared. Yes, we do. Brandon says you froze the family account and accused him of stealing. He's very upset. I imagine he is. I opened the first folder and slid it across the table. These are bank statements for the past 6 months. Every withdrawal is highlighted and cross-referenced with his social media activity. Margaret looked at the papers, frowning. Thomas, I don't understand what I'm looking at. $4,700 in unauthorized withdrawals. Money that was supposed to be for family emergencies, used instead for restaurants, clothes, and vacations. She picked up the statements and read them more carefully. I watched her face change as she saw the pattern, the dates, the amounts, the frequency. He said these were emergencies, she said quietly. A $300 dinner is an emergency? Maybe he needed to entertain clients for work? I opened the second folder. This is Brandon's employment history and salary information. He makes $62,000 a year working tech support for a local software company. He doesn't entertain clients. He doesn't have an expense account. He doesn't travel for business. Margaret set down the papers and looked at me. How did you get all this information? The same way I've been getting information for 37 years. I asked the right questions and followed the money trail. Thomas, this feels invasive. He's my son. And he's been stealing from us for 6 months. The word hung in the air between us. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. What do you want to do? She asked. I want him to pay back what he stole. I want him to acknowledge what he did. And I want to make sure it never happens again. And if he won't? I opened the third folder. Then we file a civil suit for theft and fraud. All of this becomes public record. His employer gets a copy. His credit report gets updated. And everyone in your family gets to see exactly who Brandon really is. Margaret was quiet for a long time, reading through the evidence. When she finally looked up, her face was different. Older somehow. Sadder, but also more determined. I raised him better than this, she said. I know you did. What happens now? Now we wait and see if he's learned anything from that expensive education I bought him. The second call came at 11 p.m. that same night. I was already in bed, but I'd been expecting this one too. Thomas, it's Brandon. We need to talk. It's late, Brandon. I can't sleep. This whole thing is insane. You're treating me like a criminal over a few $100. $4,700. Whatever. The point is, this is family business. You can't just freeze accounts and threaten lawsuits over money disputes between family members. I sat up in bed. Margaret stirred beside me but didn't wake up. Brandon, let me ask you something. When you were in college and needed textbook money, who did you call? You guys, but when your apartment's air conditioner broke and you needed $800 for repairs, who paid for it? I paid you back for that. No, you didn't. I have the records. I meant to pay you back. When you graduated and couldn't afford a security deposit for your new apartment, who covered it? Silence. When you got that job and wanted to celebrate with a weekend trip to Nashville, who gave you spending money? Thomas, what's your point? My point is that for 6 years, every time you needed help, you called us. Every time you had a problem, we solved it. Every time you wanted something you couldn't afford, we made it possible. And how did you repay that generosity? I never asked for any of that help. The words hit me like a slap. I'd been prepared for denial, for excuses, for bargaining. But not for this level of shameless ingratitude. You never asked for it? I repeated slowly. No, I didn't. You offered. You insisted, actually. You made it weird if I didn't accept your help. So your college education was forced on you? That's not what I meant. Your rent money was unwelcome? Thomas, you're twisting my words. I'm trying to understand how someone can benefit from $50,000 worth of generosity and then claim they never wanted it. $50,000? That's ridiculous. I got out of bed and walked to my study, where I kept copies of all the financial records. $43,000 for Georgia Tech tuition. $14,400 for post-graduation rent. $6,000 for various emergencies. Another $4,000 in gifts and special occasions. That's $67,400. Brandon. Not 50. You kept track of every penny? I'm an accountant. I keep track of everything. That's sick, Thomas. Normal people don't keep spreadsheets about family gifts. Normal people don't steal from family accounts either. I wasn't stealing. Then pay it back. The line went quiet for so long that I thought he'd hung up. Pay what back? The $4,700 you took without permission. Plus interest. You have 30 days. I don't have that kind of money. Then get it. From where? You know what I make. You found money for expensive dinners and designer clothes. Find money to repay your debts. Thomas, please, can't we work something out? Maybe I could pay it back over time, like $50 a month or something? The entitlement in his voice was staggering. He'd stolen nearly $5,000 and was now trying to negotiate a payment plan that would take him 8 years to complete. Brandon, let me explain something to you. This isn't a loan that went bad. This isn't a family favor that got out of hand. This is theft. You took money that wasn't yours, repeatedly without permission, for personal expenses. The fact that we're related doesn't make it legal. You're really going to sue me? Your own stepson. You're really going to steal from your own parents? Margaret is my mother. You're just some guy she married. And there it was. The truth he'd been hiding behind 6 years of fake gratitude and forced family dinners. I wasn't his stepfather. I wasn't family. I was just some guy who'd been convenient to have around when he needed money. You're right, Brandon. I'm just some guy. Some guy who liquidated his retirement account to pay for your education. Some guy who sold his father's tools to cover your rent. Some guy who worked overtime for 6 years to give you opportunities one never had. I never asked you to do any of that. No, you just accepted it. For 6 years. Every check, every gift, every favor. You took it all and said thank you and let me believe I was helping someone who appreciated it. I did appreciate it. Your appreciation was stealing from our joint account and calling me obsolete at my birthday dinner. I was angry that night. Leah had been drinking, and she gets mean when she drinks. I didn't mean what I said. Which part didn't you mean? The part about me leeching off your mother? Or the part about my life being boring and obsolete? All of it. I was just frustrated. Frustrated about what? About feeling like I owed you something. About everyone always talking about how generous you've been. Like I should be grateful for the rest of my life. It gets old, Thomas. I sat down in my study chair and stared at the wall. In all my years of forensic accounting, I'd investigated embezzlement, fraud, and financial abuse. I'd seen people steal from their employers, their business partners, their own children. But I'd never seen anyone express such resentment toward their own victim. So you decided to steal from us. It wasn't stealing. It was evening the score. Evening the score. You kept acting like you were doing me these huge favors, but you were really just making yourself feel important. Like you were buying a family because you couldn't have kids of your own. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Margaret and I had tried for children early in our marriage. After 2 miscarriages and years of fertility treatments, we'd accepted that it wouldn't happen for us. Brandon knew this. He'd been there during the difficult conversations, the doctor visits, the quiet disappointments. I see, I said finally. Thomas, I didn't mean. You meant every word. And you know what, Brandon? You're right about one thing. I can't have children of my own. So when I married your mother, I thought I'd gained a son. I thought I was investing in our family's future. I thought I was helping someone I loved. You were helping. I was buying affection from someone who resented every dollar I spent on him. I was funding the lifestyle of someone who saw my generosity as manipulation and my love as an inconvenience. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you called me just to talk? When's the last time you asked about my work, my health, my dreams? When's the last time you treated me like a person instead of an ATM? Silence. You have 30 days to repay what you stole, Brandon. If you don't, I'll file a civil suit and everyone in your mother's family will see exactly what kind of man you really are. You wouldn't do that to Mom. She'd be devastated if this became public. Your mother will be fine. She's stronger than you think. And she deserves to know the truth about what her son has been doing. Thomas, please. I'll pay back the money, I promise. But don't make this into some big family drama. Don't ruin my reputation over a few $1,000s. Your reputation was ruined the moment you decided to steal from people who loved you. I'm just making sure everyone else knows about it. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in manipulation and desperation. Brandon tried every strategy in the book: bargaining, threats, emotional blackmail, and appeals to family loyalty. He called Margaret at work, crying about how I was trying to destroy his life over a misunderstanding. He enlisted his cousins to pressure us for forgiveness, claiming he'd learned his lesson and just needed another chance. He even had Leah call Margaret, sobbing about how the stress was affecting their relationship and their future plans. But the most revealing moments came when he tried to negotiate directly with me. Thomas, I've been thinking about our situation, he said during one late-night call. Maybe we can reach a compromise that works for everyone. I'm listening. What if I paid back half the money now and did some work around your house to cover the rest? I could help with yard work, painting, maybe some basic computer maintenance. You want to pay off a $4,700 debt with lawn mowing? It's called sweat equity. People do it all the time. People who've run out of other options do it. People who can't get credit and don't have cash. I'm trying to be responsible here. Being responsible would have been not stealing in the first place. Fine. What if I paid $2,000 now and gave you my BMW as collateral for the rest? I looked up the car's value online while he was talking. Between the loan balance and the missed payments, Brandon owed more on that BMW than it was worth. Your car has negative equity, Brandon. I'd be taking on your debt, not collecting mine. So what do you want from me? I can't just pull $5,000 out of thin air. I want you to experience consequences. For the first time in your adult life, I want you to face the results of your choices without someone else fixing the problem for you. That's sadistic. That's parenting. Something I apparently should have done 6 years ago instead of enabling you. But the real breakthrough came when he tried a different approach entirely. Thomas, I owe you an apology, he said during what I thought would be another pointless negotiation call. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at your birthday dinner, and I realized I was completely out of line. This was new. For 3 weeks, he'd been justifying, minimizing, and deflecting. Suddenly, he was taking responsibility. I'm listening. I was angry and frustrated, but not at you. I was angry at myself for not being more successful, for not being able to stand on my own feet the way I thought I should by now. And instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I lashed out at the person who'd helped me the most. It sounded sincere. It sounded like the kind of breakthrough I'd been hoping for since this whole mess started. Go on. The truth is, I've been jealous of you. You have your life together. You have a career, a wife who loves you, financial stability. You make it look so easy, and I've been struggling just to keep up with my bills. When Leah started making comments about how we never had enough money for the things she wanted, I got defensive and started blaming you guys for not helping more. We helped plenty, Brandon. I know. God, I know. And I threw it back in your face because I was embarrassed. I felt like I was 36 years old and still needing help from my parents, and that made me feel like a failure. I wanted to believe him, despite everything he'd done, despite the theft and the cruelty and the manipulation. Part of me wanted to believe that we'd finally reached a place of honest communication. What are you proposing? I want to make this right. All of it. I want to pay back every penny I took from the account. I want to apologize to Mom for putting her in the middle of this. And I want to find a way to rebuild our relationship so that maybe someday you can trust me again. How do you plan to pay back the money? I'm going to take a second job. Uber driving, maybe, or weekend construction work. It'll take me a few months, but I can probably get you $500 a month until it's paid off. That's nearly a year of payments. I know it's not ideal, but it's the best I can do without borrowing money from other people or doing something desperate. Something about his tone bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. He sounded sincere, remorseful, genuinely committed to making amends. But after 6 years of watching him manipulate situations to his advantage, I'd learned to trust my instincts over my hopes. "Send me a written plan," I said. "Payment schedule, timeline, how you intend to track progress. If it looks reasonable, we can discuss it." "Thank you, Thomas. Really. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm grateful you're willing to consider it." The plan arrived by email 2 days later, and it was impressively detailed. Monthly payment schedule, proposed second jobs, even a budget showing how he'd cut expenses to make room for the debt payments. It looked like the work of someone who'd learned from his mistakes and was ready to take responsibility for fixing them. But something still bothered me. The tone was too perfect, too polished. It read like a business proposal rather than a personal apology. And Brandon had never been particularly good at financial planning or detailed project management. I called Robert Chen again. "I need you to check something for me," I said. "Can you find out if Brandon Whitaker has been getting help with financial planning or debt counseling recently?" "Sure thing. Give me a day or two." The answer came back faster than I'd expected. "Tommy, your boy's been busy. He consulted with 3 different credit counseling services in the past 2 weeks, and one of them specializes in negotiating with family members and private creditors. They actually have a template for exactly the kind of payment plan he sent you." I stared at my computer screen, reading Brandon's heartfelt apology email again. Every word of it had been crafted by professionals whose job was to help debtors avoid consequences. "Anything else?" "Yeah." He also contacted a family law attorney asking about grandparents' rights and step-parent obligations. Seems like he was exploring whether he could force you to continue supporting him legally. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Even his apology had been a lie, a calculated attempt to manipulate me into accepting a payment plan that would drag out for months while he figured out his next angle. "Robert, I need one more favor. Can you put together a complete financial profile on Brandon? Everything you can find legally, employment history, credit report, court records, the works. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with." "How deep do you want me to go?" "As deep as the law allows. This isn't just about stolen money anymore." The final report arrived on a Wednesday, and it painted a picture of someone I'd never really known. Brandon's financial life was a disaster. Beyond the credit card debt and the overdue car payments, he owed money to his former roommate, had defaulted on a small business loan, and was 3 months behind on his cell phone bill. His employment record showed a pattern of job hopping and personality conflicts with supervisors. But the most damning information came from court records. In addition to the small claims case I already knew about, Brandon had been involved in 2 other disputes over money. He'd been sued by a former landlord for property damage and unpaid rent. He'd also filed a harassment complaint against a former employer, claiming they'd created a hostile work environment. But the case had been dismissed when evidence emerged that Brandon had been falsifying his timesheet. This wasn't someone who'd made a few bad decisions. This was someone with a pattern of taking advantage of other people and blaming them when he got caught. I called Edmund Ross and scheduled an emergency meeting. "Edmund, I want to accelerate our timeline. Can we file the civil suit this week?" "Of course, but I thought you were going to give him 30 days. He's been using those 30 days to hire professionals to help him avoid paying me back. I don't think additional time is going to improve his character." "What's the final straw?" I handed him Robert's report. "He's not just a thief. He's a career victim who's been pulling this same routine for years. The only difference is that this time, someone's fighting back." Edmund read through the documents, occasionally raising his eyebrows or making small notes in the margins. "This is a strong case, Thomas. Very strong. We can file for the stolen money, plus interest and court costs. We can also request punitive damages based on this pattern of behavior." "How much are we talking about? With interest and penalties?" "Probably $8,000 to $10,000. Maybe more if we can prove intentional fraud." "And it all becomes public record? Every filing, every document, every piece of evidence. Anyone can walk into the courthouse and read the entire case file." I thought about Margaret's family reunion, now just 2 weeks away. About Brandon's cousins and aunts and uncles, all of whom had watched him grow up and believed he'd turned into a successful, responsible adult. About Leah's parents, who'd been planning to welcome him into their family. File it. The lawsuit hit Brandon like a freight train. Edmund served the papers at his workplace on a Friday afternoon, ensuring maximum visibility and embarrassment. By Monday morning, Brandon was calling me every hour, alternating between rage and desperation. "You actually did it," he said during the first call. "You actually sued your own stepson." "I sued someone who stole from me. The family relationship is irrelevant." "Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my career? To my reputation?" "I imagine it'll have approximately the same effect that stealing has on most people's reputations." "Thomas, please, we can still work this out privately. I'll pay you back, I promise. Just drop the lawsuit." "You had 30 days to work it out privately. You chose to spend that time hiring consultants to help you avoid paying me back." "How did you?" He caught himself, but it was too late. "How did I know about the credit counseling services?" "The same way I knew about your employment history and your other legal troubles." "I'm very good at my job, Brandon." "You investigated me?" "Your own family." "I investigated someone who was stealing from me. I wanted to know if it was an isolated incident or part of a pattern." "And what did you conclude?" "That you're exactly who you showed me you were at my birthday dinner. Someone who takes what he wants and resents anyone who expects gratitude or accountability." The lawsuit also revealed something I hadn't expected: how little support Brandon actually had among people who knew him well. His coworkers weren't surprised by the theft allegations. His former roommate called me to offer testimony about Brandon's borrowing habits. Even some of his cousins reached out privately to say they'd suspected he was taking advantage of Margaret and me. But the most telling response came from Leah. She called me on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks before the family reunion. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Leah, Brandon's girlfriend." "Hello, Leah. I wanted to talk to you about this lawsuit, about what's happening with Brandon." "I'm listening. I need you to know that I didn't know about the money he took from your account. He told me that you and Mrs. Whitaker had given him access to help with family expenses, and that everything he spent was approved. But you knew where the money for those dinners and shopping trips was coming from. I thought it was his money, from his job or savings or gifts from you guys. I never thought he was stealing." She sounded genuinely upset, and I found myself believing her. Leah could be shallow and materialistic, but she'd never struck me as dishonest. "What changed your mind?" "I saw the bank statements. When he got served with the lawsuit, he finally showed me the evidence you'd collected. All those withdrawals, all those dates. I looked at my own photos from those days, and I realized he'd been using stolen money to pay for our entire relationship." "What are you going to do about it?" "I already did it. I moved out yesterday. I can't be with someone who steals from his own family and then lies to me about it for months." This was an unexpected development. Brandon had been counting on Leah's support, both emotional and financial. Without her, he'd be facing this crisis completely alone. "Leah, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did Brandon ever say anything about paying the money back?" "Before the lawsuit, I mean, he said you were being unreasonable and that families should stick together no matter what. He said you were trying to control him by threatening to cut off his access to money." "And what did you think about that?" "I thought it sounded like he was making excuses. I grew up poor, Mr. Whitaker. My parents worked 3 jobs between them just to keep food on the table. If someone had given me the opportunities Brandon had, I would have been grateful for the rest of my life." "Thank you for telling me this. Mr. Whitaker, I hope you win your lawsuit. What Brandon did was wrong, and he needs to face consequences for it." The family reunion was held at Margaret's sister's lake house in North Georgia, a sprawling property with a main house, guest cabins, and a large dock where 3 generations of the family gathered every summer. This year, 32 people were expected: aunts, uncles, cousins, spouses, children, and grandchildren. Margaret and I arrived on Friday afternoon, and I could immediately sense the tension. Word about the lawsuit had spread through the family network, and people were choosing sides. Some relatives avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others made a point of being extra friendly, probably trying to show they weren't judging us. Brandon arrived Saturday morning with 2 black eyes and a split lip. "Jesus, Brandon, what happened to you?" asked his cousin Mike. "I got jumped outside my apartment last night. 3 guys. They took my wallet and my phone." He was lying. I could tell from the way he held his shoulders, the way he avoided making eye contact when he talked. But more importantly, I could tell from the specific injuries. 2 black eyes and a split lip wasn't the result of a random mugging. It was the result of someone punching him in the face repeatedly, someone who wanted to hurt him personally rather than just rob him. I had a pretty good idea who that someone might be. Leah had mentioned during our phone call that she had 2 older brothers who were very protective of her. If they'd found out that Brandon had been using stolen money to finance their relationship, and that their sister had unknowingly been an accessory to theft, they might have decided to deliver their own form of justice. But Brandon's appearance had an unintended consequence. Instead of generating sympathy for him, it made him look desperate and pathetic. Several relatives commented quietly that he seemed to be falling apart, that something was seriously wrong in his life. The confrontation I'd been planning happened Saturday evening, after dinner, when the whole family was gathered on the deck overlooking the lake. Margaret's brother-in-law, Uncle Ray, had been drinking and decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "So, Thomas," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "what's this I hear about you suing Brandon? Seems like a family matter that should be handled privately. I'd been expecting this moment, and I was ready for it." "You're right, Ray. It should have been handled privately. But when someone steals money from family accounts and refuses to pay it back, sometimes private handling isn't enough." "Stealing is a strong word," said Aunt Patricia, Brandon's godmother. "Maybe it was just a misunderstanding about what money he was allowed to use." I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. "Let me show you what a misunderstanding looks like." I spread the bank statements across the picnic table, each unauthorized withdrawal highlighted in yellow. Then I added the cross-referenced social media posts, showing exactly how the stolen money had been spent. March 15th, $300 withdrawn from our joint family emergency account. Same day, Brandon posted photos from a $200 dinner at Bones Restaurant. April 3rd, $250 withdrawn. Same day, photos of new Ralph Lauren shirts and designer jeans. The family gathered around the table, studying the evidence in silence. You could have heard a pin drop. "Brandon," said his cousin Sarah, "is this true? Did you take money from their account without asking?" Brandon looked around the deck at 31 sets of eyes staring at him. His face was already swollen from whatever had happened the night before, but now it was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "It's not that simple," he said. "Thomas is making it sound worse than it was." "How is it not that simple?" asked Uncle Ray. "Either you took money that wasn't yours, or you didn't. I had access to the account. Mom said I could use it for emergencies." "Was dinner at Bones Restaurant an emergency?" I asked. "I was entertaining a potential client." I pulled out another piece of paper. "This is Brandon's employment record. He works in tech support for a local software company. He doesn't have clients. He doesn't have an entertainment budget. He doesn't travel for business." "Thomas, you had me investigated?" Brandon's voice cracked with outrage. "I investigated someone who was stealing from me. I wanted to know if it was an isolated incident or part of a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" asked Margaret's sister. I pulled out the court records. 3 lawsuits in 5 years. Unpaid rent, property damage, falsified timesheets. A pattern of taking things that don't belong to him and blaming other people when he gets caught. The silence stretched for a long time. Finally, Margaret's elderly mother, the family matriarch, spoke up. "Brandon, sweetheart, is this true? Have you been taking advantage of Thomas and Margaret?" Brandon looked around the deck desperately, searching for allies, for someone who would take his side against the mountain of evidence spread out in front of them. "Grandma, it's not what it looks like. Thomas has been holding money over my head for years, making me feel like I owe him something for every dollar he ever spent on me. When I finally tried to assert some independence, he turned vindictive." "Independence?" I said. "You call stealing independence?" I call it taking what was already mine. You spent years making me feel guilty for accepting your help, always keeping track of every penny like you were my loan shark instead of my stepfather. Maybe I took a little extra to compensate for 6 years of emotional manipulation. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, but before I could respond, Margaret stood up. That's enough. Her voice was quiet but steel-hard. Brandon, I have listened to you justify and minimize and make excuses for 3 weeks now. I have watched you try to manipulate everyone in this family into taking your side against the man who sacrificed his own financial security to give you opportunities. Mom, I'm not finished. Thomas liquidated his retirement account to pay for your college. He sold his father's tools and his mother's china to cover your expenses. He worked overtime for 6 years to make sure you graduated debt-free. And this is how you repay him? By stealing from us and then claiming he deserved it. Brandon's face crumpled. Mom, please. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. I understand that you're 36 years old and you're still making excuses for your behavior like a child. I understand that you've been lying to me for months about where your money was coming from. And I understand that you stood up at Thomas's birthday dinner and humiliated the man who's been more of a father to you than your biological father ever was. The family was watching this exchange like a tennis match, heads turning back and forth between Margaret and Brandon. But I could see from their expressions that Margaret's words were having an impact. Several relatives were nodding in agreement. Your biological father walked out when you were 8 years old, Margaret continued. He's contributed exactly $0 to your education, your housing, or your success. Thomas stepped up and filled that role without being asked, without expecting anything in return except basic respect and gratitude. And you threw it all back in his face because you were embarrassed about needing help. I didn't ask for his help. No, you just took it. For 6 years. Every check, every payment, every favor. You took it all and said thank you and let us believe you appreciated it. But the whole time, you were resenting us for our generosity. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. Margaret's right, Brandon. I've watched Thomas bust his ass for you for years. He never missed one of your graduation ceremonies, never complained about the money, never made you feel like a burden. Hell, he talks about you like you're his own son. Because he wants to control me. Brandon exploded. Don't you see? He's not generous, he's manipulative. He gives you money so you'll owe him something, so you'll have to listen to his advice and follow his rules and be grateful forever. I looked around the deck at Margaret's family, people I'd known for 6 years. People who'd welcomed me into their lives when I married Margaret. I saw disappointment in their faces, but not at me. They were disappointed in Brandon, in the ugly, entitled person he'd revealed himself to be. Brandon, said his cousin Mike. That's your stepdad you're talking about, the man who paid for your college. He's not my father. He's some guy who married my mom and thinks that makes him important. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt Margaret stiffen beside me, felt the collective intake of breath from 30 people who couldn't believe what they just heard. And then, quietly, Margaret's mother spoke again. Brandon Michael, you will apologize to Thomas right now. Grandma, right now. Or you can leave this reunion and not come back. Brandon looked around the deck one more time, searching for someone, anyone, who would support him. But every face showed the same expression. Disappointment, embarrassment, and growing anger. I'm sorry, he muttered, not looking at me. Louder, said his grandmother. And look at him when you say it. Brandon raised his eyes to mine. I'm sorry, Thomas. But I could see in his expression that he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry for getting caught. Sorry for being humiliated in front of his family. Sorry that his manipulation hadn't worked. Apology noted, I said. But it doesn't change anything. You still owe me $4,700, plus interest and court costs. The lawsuit continues. Thomas, please, said Aunt Patricia. He's apologized. Can't we put this behind us now? Patricia, if your son stole $5,000 from you, would an apology be enough? She was quiet for a moment. No, I suppose it wouldn't. Then you understand why I can't just let this go. The reunion continued for another day, but the mood was permanently soured. People were polite to Brandon, but the warmth was gone. Conversations died when he joined them. Children were kept closer to their parents when he was around. By Sunday morning, several families had decided to cut their visit short. Brandon left before lunch, claiming he had to get back to work. But I overheard his cousin Sarah telling her husband that Brandon had been crying in his cabin the night before, calling various relatives and begging them to intercede on his behalf. Margaret and I stayed for the full weekend, and I was surprised by how many family members approached me privately to express their support. "I never liked that boy," confided Uncle Ray. "Always seemed entitled to me, like the world owed him something." "You're doing the right thing," said Margaret's sister. "Brandon needs to learn that actions have consequences." "I'm proud of you for standing up to him," said Sarah. "Someone should have done it years ago." But the most meaningful conversation came from Margaret's mother, who pulled me aside Sunday morning before we left. "Thomas, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Henderson." "Yes, I do. I've watched you love my grandson for 6 years, and I never fully appreciated what that meant. When Margaret married you, I thought you were getting the better end of the deal, a wife and a ready-made family. I didn't understand that you were the one making sacrifices. Brandon is a good kid who made some bad choices. Brandon is a 36-year-old man who's been making bad choices for years. And instead of helping him grow up, we've all been enabling him by making excuses and cleaning up his messes." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for loving our family enough to do the hard thing. Thank you for caring enough about Brandon to hold him accountable." The drive home was quiet. Margaret stared out the window for most of the trip, occasionally sighing or shaking her head. Finally, about an hour from Atlanta, she spoke. "I failed him. Margaret, that's not true. I raised him to think he was special, that the rules didn't apply to him. I protected him from consequences when he was young, and I created this monster who thinks he's entitled to other people's money. You raised him to be confident and ambitious. Those are good things. Confident and ambitious people don't steal from their families." We drove in silence for another few miles. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see if he's learned anything." The answer came 3 days later. Instead of paying me back or even attempting to negotiate a reasonable settlement, Brandon hired a lawyer and filed a countersuit. He claimed that I had emotionally manipulated him into accepting financial assistance, then used his dependency to control his life choices. He was seeking damages for financial abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The countersuit was based on a legal theory I'd never heard of, something called financial coercion in family relationships. According to his lawyer, my pattern of providing financial support had created an unhealthy power dynamic that damaged Brandon's ability to make independent decisions. It was simultaneously brilliant and pathetic. Brandon was arguing that being given a free college education and 6 years of financial support had somehow harmed him, and that he deserved compensation for the trauma of being helped. Edmund Ross was furious when he called to tell me about the filing. "This is frivolous, Thomas. Completely frivolous. No court in Georgia is going to award damages to someone who claims he was harmed by receiving financial gifts. But we still have to defend against it?" Unfortunately, yes. His lawyer is smart enough to make arguments that sound plausible on paper, even if they're ridiculous in practice. How long will this drag out? Could be months. Maybe longer if he keeps filing motions and appeals. I hung up the phone and stared out my office window. Brandon had escalated this conflict beyond anything I'd imagined. He wasn't just refusing to pay me back. He was actively trying to destroy me financially through legal fees and court costs. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed I would get tired of fighting and eventually settle just to make the problem go away. He didn't understand that I'd spent 37 years as an accountant, most of it doing forensic work. I didn't give up when numbers didn't add up. I kept digging until I found the truth. And I was about to find out a truth about Brandon that would end this war permanently. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Robert Chun called me on a Friday afternoon with information I hadn't asked for. "Tommy, I hope you don't mind, but I kept digging into your stepson's background. Some things weren't adding up, and my curiosity got the better of me. What did you find? Remember that family emergency account he was stealing from? Well, I tracked some of his other financial activity, and I found something interesting. 3 months ago, he opened a separate savings account and deposited $5,200 in cash. Where did he get $5,200 in cash? That's what I wanted to know. So I dug deeper, and I found out he's been running a little side business. Computer repair, mostly. Nothing wrong with that, except he's been advertising his services on Craigslist and Facebook as certified tech support. And he's been charging premium rates for basic repairs. How is that relevant? He's not certified in anything, Tommy. I checked with every major certification body, and Brandon Whitaker doesn't exist in their databases. He's been lying to customers about his qualifications and overcharging them for services. That's fraud. It gets better. Remember that family fund he was stealing from? Well, according to his bank records, he made several large cash deposits around the same times as his withdrawals from your account. I think he was double-dipping. I sat up straighter in my chair. Explain that. He'd withdraw money from your family account for fake emergencies, then deposit the cash payments from his repair business into his personal savings. Essentially, he was using your money to fund his living expenses while hoarding his own income. How much money are we talking about? Based on the deposits I can track? Probably $8,000 to $10,000 over the past year. All of it hidden from you, your wife, and the IRS. This changed everything. Brandon hadn't just stolen $4,700 from our family account. He'd been running a systematic fraud operation, lying to customers, hiding income, and using our money as a free loan while he built up his own secret savings. Robert, can you document all of this? Already working on it. I'll have a complete report by Monday. Send copies to my lawyer and to the IRS fraud division. You sure you want to escalate this that far? I thought about Brandon's countersuit, his claims that I had financially abused him, his attempt to portray himself as the victim in this situation. I'm sure. The final confrontation happened at the courthouse. Edmund had subpoenaed Brandon's bank records as part of our defense against his countersuit, and the hidden savings account had been exposed during discovery. When Brandon's lawyer saw the evidence of tax fraud and false advertising, he immediately withdrew from the case. Brandon showed up to the hearing without representation, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face had healed from whatever beating he'd taken, but he looked 10 years older than he had at my birthday dinner 6 months earlier. The judge was not sympathetic. Mr. Whitaker, you're claiming that your stepfather financially abused you by providing educational support and housing assistance? Yes, Your Honor. He used money to control my life choices. And during this period of alleged abuse, you were also stealing money from joint family accounts and hiding income from a fraudulent business operation? Brandon's face went pale. I don't understand the question. You don't understand the question? Mr. Whitaker, the evidence shows that you withdrew $4,700 from family accounts without authorization while simultaneously depositing over $8,000 in cash into a private savings account. You were essentially borrowing money from people who were already supporting you, while hiding your ability to pay them back. Your Honor, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, let me address your countersuit. You're asking this court to award you damages because someone gave you a free college education and helped you establish your adult life. Do you understand how that sounds? He made me dependent on him. Mr. Whitaker, you're 36 years old. You have a college degree, a job, and according to these bank records, nearly $10,000 in savings. In what way are you dependent on anyone? Brandon looked around the courtroom desperately. Margaret was sitting in the gallery behind me, her face expressionless. Several of his cousins had come to watch the proceedings, probably hoping to see him vindicated. Instead, they were watching him get destroyed by a judge who clearly had no patience for his victim narrative. Your Honor, I just want this to be over. I'll pay back the money I took from the account. I'll drop my countersuit. Can we please just settle this? Mr. Whitaker, this court doesn't negotiate settlements. We determine facts and apply the law. The facts are that you stole money from people who trusted you, lied about your business qualifications to defraud customers, and hid income to avoid paying taxes. Those aren't civil matters anymore. Those are potential criminal matters. The judge turned to me. Mr. Thomas Whitaker, you're seeking repayment of stolen funds plus interest and court costs. Given the evidence presented, I'm awarding you the full amount requested, $4,700 in stolen funds, $800 in interest, and $2,200 in legal fees. Total judgment of $7,700. Thank you, Your Honor. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal prosecution of the theft charges, and to the IRS for investigation of tax fraud. Brandon collapsed into his chair like he'd been shot. Your Honor, please. I have a job, a reputation. If this becomes a criminal matter, it'll destroy my life. Mr. Whitaker, your life was destroyed the moment you decided that stealing from your family was an acceptable way to solve your financial problems. This court is simply acknowledging that reality. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. 6 months later, I ran into Leah at the grocery store. She looked good, healthier, happier, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Mr. Whitaker, how are you? I'm well, Leah. How are you? Great, actually. I'm engaged. She showed me a modest but beautiful ring. His name is David. He's a teacher, completely different from Brandon. Honest, stable, kind. I'm happy for you. Thank you. And Mr. Whitaker, I wanted you to know that I testified for the prosecution in Brandon's criminal trial. I couldn't let him keep lying about what happened. How did that go? He pled guilty to theft and tax evasion. 18 months probation, restitution, and 500 hours of community service. He also has to attend financial counseling and anger management classes. And how's he doing now? Not well. He lost his job when the criminal charges became public. He's working at a call center for $12 an hour and living in a studio apartment across town. His BMW got repossessed, and his credit is completely destroyed. I should have felt satisfaction hearing this, but instead I felt something closer to sadness. Brandon had thrown away every advantage he'd been given, destroyed every relationship that mattered, and sabotaged his own future for the sake of a few $1,000s and his wounded pride. Leah, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think he's learned anything from all this? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I don't think Brandon learns, Mr. Whitaker. I think he just finds new people to blame for his problems. Right now, he's telling everyone who'll listen that you destroyed his life out of spite, that you could have helped him but chose revenge instead. And what do you think? I think you gave him 6 years of chances, and he wasted every one of them. Some people just can't accept responsibility for their own choices. As for Margaret and me, we'd emerged from the crisis stronger than ever. The experience had shown us both what we were capable of when we stood together against adversity. We downsized to a smaller house, started a small consulting business together, and discovered that we could build a happy life without constantly worrying about Brandon's problems. We still saw him occasionally at family gatherings, but the dynamic had completely changed. He was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable around people who knew the truth about what he'd done. The family treated him like a cautionary tale rather than a success story. I never got back the $52,000 I'd invested in Brandon's education and early adult life. But I'd gotten something more valuable: the knowledge that Margaret and I could weather any storm as long as we faced it together. I'd also gotten the satisfaction of knowing that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed by people who think they're above the rules. Sometimes justice is about punishment. Sometimes it's about restitution. But sometimes, justice is simply about making sure that the truth is known and that the people who've been harmed are validated in their experience. Brandon had spent 6 years teaching me that generosity without boundaries is just enabling. I'd spent 6 months teaching him that consequences are the price of betrayal. In the end, we'd both learned exactly what we needed to know. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you handle it? Let us know your thoughts.